Hey, good afternoon. Welcome to Trail Talk. I am really glad you could join me today because we are back on our First Americans Fighting for the U.S. series. I'm telling you, this really has grown into a much bigger series of lessons than I anticipated it would. We are up to World War II today, but we are not even covering everything. I have found myself, I don't know if it's because I'm listening to some other books or what, but anyway, I'm finding out more and more information about World War II that I think is going to be very interesting to add to this. And then we have so many other wars moving, closer to today. But at any rate, thanks for joining me today on Trail Talk. I'm Edie, and I am live at the Chisholm Trail Heritage Center in Duncan, Oklahoma. We're in our classroom studio. It's a great place to do these productions. So after World War I, the 45th Infantry Division was formed through the Defense Act of 1920. So it comprised National Guard units from Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona. And as much as 1/5 of this division were Native Americans. But I mean, think of the states: Oklahoma, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona. These are places where large numbers of Native Americans have lived, still live. And so they, the number of Native Americans who were in the armed services just continued to grow following World War I, even though, if you'll remember, there was disappointment because, well, I can't remember if it was by 1920, but even after World War I, there were Native Americans who still did not have citizenship in the U.S. Right? Big sigh. But they continued to serve their nation, our nation, because they believed it was the right thing to do. And also they believed at some point the U.S. would recognize their treaties and their land ownership and all of that sort of thing. Well, the 45th Division was called up to service in September of 1940 to kind of with the thought, maybe the U.S. will have to join up in fight in World War II, even though nobody wanted that to happen. World War I, we joined up, the Native Americans got there in October of 1918 and broke down the Germans because they couldn't break the code talkers' codes, and the U.S. well, the Allies were able to have success, but in 1939 World War II was pretty much, at least the Italians and the Germans were really wreaking havoc in Europe, and the U.S. did not want to be a party to that war if there was any way to avoid it. But in 1940, knowing that there's a possibility, they were training, they were doing exercises to prepare. And at that time, there were approximately 2,000 Native Americans representing 50 tribes who were serving in this 45th Division. They trained at Fort Sill, right down the road here from where we are in Duncan, Oklahoma. And they began to swell with non-guardsmen from across the country. And the 45th Division were also known as the Thunderbirds. This was their insignia. Now, this is an infantry division. That means marching. So the Thunderbirds that are the pilots, that's a completely different branch of the military, not the Army. So that's another thing that comes along at a later time. But they, the Thunderbirds moved from Fort Sill to, they moved to a Camp Barkley near Abilene, Texas. But But at this time in history, thanks to Western movies and the dime novels of the day, Louis L'Amour, all those Western story writers, that Western genre, Native Americans were still, people still had some trepidation about how they felt about Native Americans. Those movies and books kind of fed into that whole savage, uncivilized type of culture among the Native Americans, of which by the 1940s, I mean, we know that that did not exist anymore, but in people's imaginations, being fed by this entertainment industry, that was the case. So when the Thunderbirds went to Fort Devens in Massachusetts in the spring of 1942, now remember, the U.S. was attacked at Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. So by the spring of 1942, we are in full-on war mode. We are involved now in this world war against Japan, and we're kind of trying to figure out what we're going to do in the European theater. So there were men from 47 states, which in 1942, I can't remember when, Alaska and Hawaii, and what was the other one? New Mexico, was that the next state that became state? I can't remember when they all became states, but at any rate, they, in order to kind of, I don't know, teach people about their culture rather than people assuming that all of this ridiculous, uncivilized culture was the way the Native Americans lived, they put together indigenous performers from the 45th Infantry Division. And so they would wear regalia, they would have headdresses, they would hold, you know, feathers or pipes or whatever type of items of significance that meant something to them, to their tribe. They would hold those and they would perform dances to try to teach their culture to the, you know, just the people who lived in these areas, the Northeast part of the US. They performed for Boy Scout troops, churches, civic institutions, USO shows, bond rallies. So their job wasn't just to teach about their culture, but it was to, I think that besides, they were promoting kind of a patriotism and doing it through their Native American cultures, which I think is really significant. Maybe people were drawn because it was something that they knew nothing about, but the result was kind of a big rally kind of feeling that they were able to be a part of. So not only did these Native Americans, you know, eventually go into battle, but right here in the States, they did their part by raising awareness and teaching about their cultures and the need for the whole U.S. to pull together at that time. They left in June of 1943, and by that time, these performers had danced for an estimated 400,000 people. So they were quite popular. And, you know, I mean, if something's working, you know, jump on it, right? And so I believe that's what they did. But the New Englanders gained a newfound respect for the Native American soldiers in that division, and they were able to squelch those crazy ideas people were perpetuating from the movie. Well, we're believing because the way the movies and books were perpetuating all of that information. So they, there was a Pawnee soldier at one point who was instructing other soldiers in the use of bayonets. And the Secretary of War, Henry Stimson, walked up to him and said, remarked that he was the finest instructor in bayonet practice that he had ever seen. And then Major Lee Gilstrap of that division noted, the Indians make such fine soldiers. We have Indian officers holding ranks as high as lieutenant colonel. Now, it sounds as though these men who were not of Native American origin were a little surprised by the skill and the leadership qualities that these Native American men held. But if you think back to the way the things we've learned about Native American culture and the chiefs and how they had all these roles and how these warriors were raised up, it should not be a surprise. It should come as no surprise that these men were natural soldiers, natural leaders. So some of these National Guard men had attended the Chillicothe Indian Agricultural School, and that's one of those boarding schools with the sketchy past, the sketchy way that the students were treated. They were children, and as we know, that the truth has come out as to how they were treated at those schools. But during the World War II, that school was actually where the 180th Infantry Regiment of this 45th Division was located. And so some of these men, I don't have all of their names, but a couple of them went on to become Medal of Honor recipients. This man's name is Ernest Childers, and I chose two accounts to read to you. And these are the reasons why these two men that we're going to focus on, why they were selected for the Medal of Honor. I want you to hear what they did. So Ernest Childers received the Medal of Honor for heroic action in 1943 when, up against machine gun fire, he and 8 other men charged the enemy. He suffered a broken foot during the assault, but ordered covering fire and advanced up the hill, single-handedly killing 2 snipers, silencing 2 machine gun nests, and capturing an enemy mortar observer. All of that with a broken foot. Okay, he was valiant, to say the least, in his commitment to battle. And I love this picture. Can you tell that these are just a formation, huge formation of soldiers standing at attention back there to observe this man being awarded this medal, the Medal of Honor. And I'm just moved by his patriotism and his devotion to the men who he fought alongside, as well as our country during this war. The other soldier I want to tell you about is named Jack Montgomery. Now, Ernest Childers was from Oklahoma. Let me see if he's Muskogee Creek, and he's from Oklahoma. Jack Montgomery is Cherokee, and he was a first lieutenant. And on February 22nd, 1944, in Italy, his rifle platoon was under fire by 3 echelons of enemy forces. So here's his story. His story is crazy. Okay. He was born in Long, Oklahoma, near Sallisaw. He was, as I said, Cherokee. And this was awarded, this is how the citation reads, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity That's a hard and strange word we don't use very often. We should use that word so I know how to say it. At risk of life above and beyond the call of duty. Okay, 2 hours before daybreak, a strong force of enemy infantry established themselves in 3 echelons at 50 yards, 100 yards, and 300 yards, respectively, in front of his rifle platoons. The closest position had 4 machine guns and 1 mortar. It threatened the immediate security of the platoon. He seized an MI rifle, I don't know what that means, and several hand grenades. He crawled up a ditch to within hand grenade range of the enemy, which if you think pull and throw, and was it like 8 seconds or something like that before a hand grenade goes off? So however far he could throw it, if they were 50 yards away, I mean, I'd say he probably covered a lot of that. When you guess he's probably 10 yards at the most at that point. He threw a hand grenade, fired his rifle, threw his grenades so accurately he killed 8 of the enemy and captured the other 4. He's by himself doing this. Okay, captured 4. He returned to his platoon, called for artillery fire on a house in and around which he suspected the majority of the enemy had entrenched themselves. He armed himself with a carbine and proceeded along a shallow ditch. As withering fire from the riflemen and machine gunners in the second position was concentrated on him, he attacked this position with such fury that 7 of the enemy surrendered to him. And both machine guns were silenced. 3 German dead were found in the vicinity later that morning. Then First Lieutenant Montgomery continued boldly toward the house, 300 yards from his platoon position, 3 football fields away by himself. It was now daylight, and the enemy observation was excellent across the flat open terrain, which led to his objective. When the artillery barrage had lifted, he ran fearlessly toward the strongly defended position. As the enemy started streaming out of the house, he, unafraid of treacherous snipers, exposed himself daringly to assemble the surrendering enemy and send them to the rear. His fearless, aggressive, and intrepid actions that morning accounted for a total of 11 dead, 32 prisoners, and an unknown number of wounded. Then, as war would treat someone, that night, while aiding an adjacent unit to repulse a counterattack, he was struck by mortar fragments and seriously wounded. But his selflessness and courage in alone attacking 3 strong enemy positions inspired his men to a degree beyond estimation. There are countless stories like the 2 I just shared about these 2 men from Oklahoma, these Native Americans who may or may not have been considered U.S. citizens at this time, but who walked right into enemy fire to protect their men. I mean, the bravery, the commitment, it's impressive. Excuse me. He was injured seriously, but he was not killed at that time. You have to believe this picture shows him at a later date. But at any rate, there was nothing that said that he died from those injuries. I don't know if he was sent home or if he fought again after that. There were other men. There was a man named Van Barfoot, who was a Choctaw, who received the Medal of Honor as well. But General George Patton, probably the most famous general from World War II, was quoted as saying about the Thunder. He said this to the Thunderbirds: "You are one of the best, if not the best, divisions in the history of American arms." And it was about 1/5 Native Americans. So much pride, so much to be said about the dignity and the just devotion that the Native Americans have for the United States and for the way they serve. So there was a man named Bill Maudlin in those days. He was a famed World War II cartoonist, and his career actually began with the 45th Infantry. And his cartoon character, Willie, was inspired by a fellow soldier named Racing Billy, who was a Choctaw Indian from Kyoto, Oklahoma. And the cartoon was Willie and Joe. And so if you look up Willie and Joe, there are a number of cartoons, and he would write little, lines to go with them. Some of them I didn't get, and I think it was because they were associated with the times, World War II, and maybe even some military things that I'm not as familiar with. But there were others that definitely, there was one of, they were back in the States, and one of them was laying on a park bench covered with a big sign that said, "Welcome home, our veterans," which was, kind of, the nose at the way the veterans were being received and treated, and how many of them found themselves homeless and sleeping on park benches because, and that's a thing that still happens today. Our veterans need a lot of support because of the things they experience in wartime, in battle, leaves them affected, and coming back to just normal life isn't always easy. And so anyway, so that brings us to the most famous code talkers of World War II were the Navajo code talkers. Now there were a lot more than 8 of them. But they, there was a movie made about them and everything. But they were not alone. And of course, they weren't the original code talkers. If you'll remember, the Choctaw in World War I, among some of the other tribes, were the first. But the Navajo code talkers definitely, I think the movie's like, what's the name of that movie? Like The Wind, something about the wind? Or my research assistant, Bailey, who's also running camera, is going to do the little check on that for me. Thank you.
Wind talkers.
Wind talkers. Wind talkers. But another tribe that had a lot of, did a lot of good work as code talkers were Pawnee, who we know are from Oklahoma. The Navajo never really, were never really brought to Oklahoma. I think they might have just been here for a short time, and then they were allowed to go back to New Mexico. But the Pawnee code talkers used their language. 7 of the 9 Pawnee code talkers served with the 45th Division. Staff Sergeant Frank Davis, Sergeant Brummett Echo Hawk, Sergeant Grant Gover, Staff Sergeant Philip Grover. Maybe it is Gover. Maybe I misspelled that. If I did, I'm apologizing right now. Staff Sergeant Chauncey Matlock, Sergeant Harold Morgan, and Master Sergeant Floyd Rice. And they were all recognized for their World War II contributions when they received the Congressional Gold Medal in 2013. Yes, that was a big quiet pause, because I just cannot get over the fact that so many Native Americans were not even acknowledged for the great contributions they made for decades until decades later. 2013 would have been 70 years after they served. Does anyone else see a little gap, much bigger than that pause I just did? Anyway, they were inducted into the Oklahoma Military Hall of Fame in 2015. Well done, Oklahoma. I still feel like it's a little lagging in your time, but I appreciate the spirit of the acknowledgement, as I'm sure their families do as well. I loved this is a portrait of this man, and I don't know if you've noticed here, he has lost part of his arm. And he's wearing this congressional gold medal here. You can see he's got white hair, but this is a man who served the United States, and he's wearing his tribal regalia, bearing the effects of the war, but also the acknowledgement of his contribution, his what he did. And so the Pawnees played a big role in being code talkers during World War II. So the war had a significant and lasting impact on Indian country, which we've looked at a map before. Indian country was like practically all of the Great Plains at one time. It was reduced down to Indian territory, but it included all the northern plains too. Approximately 150,000 American Indians participated in military service or agriculture and industrial jobs to support the war effort. The exodus from the reservations eroded the physical boundaries that separated Native people from mainstream America. So what they're saying is that when so many men packed up and left their reservations, the reservation lines were no longer so distinct. It was a way of merging into mainstream culture, I guess you could say, in the United States. The war also gave rise to a growing sense of expectation because, having answered the call of duty, they again hoped against hope that the U.S. would honor tribal treaty rights and allow Indians to live in their own way. So World War II, we're going to talk some more about World War II in next week, because we haven't even talked about Native American women serving, and that's a whole great lesson in and of itself, as well as some other interesting things that I've been learning about World War II. But many of these men who served during World War II went on to serve in the Korean War. And this particular painting is from this famous battle at Pork Chop Hill that happened in Korea. And this painting was is by R.T. Foster. It was dedicated February 26, 2003. It's acrylic on canvas, and it's on the 5th floor of the South Hall of the House Wing at the Oklahoma State Capitol building. Because this 45th Division it's part of Oklahoma. I'm not going to dig into what all happens in the Korean conflict, but of course there are so many more men and women who are acknowledged for their service. But the 45th Infantry Division was deactivated in 1968. However, their lineage and honors are carried on within the Oklahoma National Guard unit. Oklahoma's indigenous citizens, men and women, continue to serve their state and their country with distinction. So that is a wrap on just this part of World War II. But I hope you're as intrigued and hopefully your eyes are open to the great service the first Americans have given to this country. And, focusing on them should not make anyone feel like I'm taking the focus off of any other people group. I just think that this is an important part of learning about the diversity of the people here in Oklahoma and the contributions they made to the war efforts. And the U.S. has been a part of a number of wars and conflicts through the years. And I am really, really loving this. And the that started way back when Europeans first came to the US, and how the Native Americans were kind of forced to pick a side, and how all of that has changed and flowed and trickled and moved to where it is today. And I just hope you're really getting some great information from these lessons. Tomorrow, Mike Kahn, who's a local name, many of you might recognize, he's going to be here. We're going to be here at 10 o'clock in the morning, but of course the video will be on our Facebook page. Mike's going to come and talk about Duncan Heart and Soul. They've been having meetings. They're really kicking everything off. And Mike's going to just talk to us about what is heart and soul? What does that even mean? What kind of things is this organization hoping to accomplish in our community? So please plan to watch that, and maybe you'll get a little more insight and want to jump on board and help make this a huge success here in Duncan. Thanks again for watching. I will see you guys tomorrow morning. Happy trails.
Happy trails.